Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ISC Squared New Jersey Chapter podcast, Unencrypted Chatter. Today, our program special guest is Grace Chi, co-founder and CEO of Pulsedive. She'll be our subject matter expert, and we look forward to a very informative conversation. I'm Lindsay, Pierre, ISC Squared. Joining me today is my co-host, Patti. Joe?
Hi, Lindsay. Great to be co-hosting with you.
Great. Grace works closely with defensive security and as a CTI practitioners all over the world, ranging from local consulting teams to enterprise operations. As a result, she has a unique insights into the requirements and diverse traits of CTI success for individuals, teams, and organizations. On the weekend, she's a hyper-serious cooperative board gamer and watercolorist. Grace, welcome to ISC Squared Chapters, Unencrypted Chatter, and we'd like you to introduce yourself briefly and tell us about your history as an ISC Squared member.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. As Lindsay mentioned, my name is Grace. I'm co-founder and COO of Pulsedive, which is a New Jersey-based, Jersey Pride, New Jersey-based startup that's been around since 2017. So we're a little bit of dinosaurs in the security startup world. As mentioned, we work heavily with blue teamers, a little bit with red team and different types of security operations, but we work, sector agnostic, and everything we do, everything we're focused on is about creating frictionless solutions for threat intelligence teams. Whether that team is a single IT person who somehow found themselves responsible for threat intel, which happens, to large programs that are relatively more mature and able to curate and manage their own intelligence and their own program. We have something for everybody. But most importantly, we're extremely community driven. So we have a community platform, we have open source intelligence. We allow users with just a free account to just scan and get enriched data on various hosts in order to support, their security analysis.
Wow, that's a lot. And for the young people out there who is struggling to understand this industry and find their way, tell us about how you involve young people in their professional journey.
Yeah, of course. And also, for anyone who isn't quite familiar, I view threat intelligence as not just a set of tools, processes, but it is the underlying knowledge base of what threats, what risks, what cybersecurity risks are facing an organization and taking the proper steps to mitigate that. And I will say one thing that I didn't mention to you before that I'll come back to now is I've been a member with ISC2 for, I would like to say, about 5 years, when it was about 50 people. It is, how big, do you know how big it is now, Joe?
700.
700.
Okay.
Yes, it's huge now. Yeah.
Every time I join another meeting, there's just more and more people. And the reason I joined was not necessarily to, push Pulsedive or to even network for my own gain, but it was because I wanted to support the New Jersey community. I felt like there was a big gap. There was lots of cool B-sides and other sorts of local communities and a lot of other places in New Jersey. Was a weird dead zone, even though we know there's so many security practitioners. And so that's how I got started, volunteered. I stuffed bags for CCon last year. I did some speaking presentations, and I also mentor every single month for over a year, maybe 2 years now, with the program. And so one of the core ways that I try to invest back into the security industry and the talent pool is by taking on new mentors, some of whom I still talk to 2 years later, and some of whom need a point in time support, and then they run off on their merry way and get their next job.
Great.
Well, that's great. Yeah, it's funny that you say that New Jersey seemed like a dead zone. I've always been New York based, even though I live in northern New Jersey. And I first got introduced to this chapter when I went to CCon, and I said, oh my God, there's so many security people in New Jersey. I had no idea, right in my neighborhood.
We had no representation. Exactly. People kept going into New York, and I said, listen, I like New York. I used to work there. I'd rather just drive 30 minutes, somewhere
Right.
locally.
Okay, so Grace, as you said, threat intelligence is a big field. It's a complicated one. I know it's one that for a lot of people, when they don't come from the military, it can be difficult to get into. And also just the idea that you've stood up, as you say, a capability, not just a tool set, is pretty intense. Can you tell us a little bit about how you did that and how you pulled it off?
Yeah, so the journey through, and I'm by no means a traditional security person. And if you were to ask me at any day, hey, can you help me with, tactical and technical threat research or threat analysis, I'd give you 5,000 people who are our users and our community members who are way smarter than me at these things. But one thing that's really important to remember is that threat intelligence is multidisciplinary by nature. So as Joe mentioned, a big arm of it comes from military or military adjacent roles in producing intelligence that we're used to. Another arm, a big feeder role, is the technical security practitioner. So maybe working from IT help desk or blue team security analyst. And the last piece, which sometimes causes friction in this kind of field, is the kind of risk, compliance, governance type arm, where that's really where it bubbles up to, right, the end game. These three different fields, all with their unique business understanding and their unique insights into threat intelligence, don't necessarily speak the same language. So it is extremely tough, and a big piece of where I spend my time is helping kind of share empathy on the different approaches and giving our users and our clients the tool sets and the right language and the right positioning so that they can understand how to actually help the business at a greater context.
So you're driving a very compelling argument. So with all the talk about around AI and large language models and so on, what does a young professional think? Is cyber intelligence an individual thing, a small group, collaborative, or is the AI revolution a part of that game changer?
So it's extraordinarily collaborative. Part of research I performed 3 years ago and also a year ago was about the state of sharing and the importance of networking for threat intelligence purposes. And a piece of, what Joe mentioned before too is how do you build this out? Threat intelligence cannot function in a silo. If you are taking on in an organization, even with 50 people, saying we need to produce and understand intelligence, understand internal telemetry and external, right, attribution and what campaigns are happening, it cannot be done. So inherently, more knowledge sharing within the proper channels, more ways to collaborate across similar peers in the industry and similar organizations with similar threat profiles is really valuable, because that's when you get the just-in-time warnings of, hey, I'm seeing some weird behavior. Oh, I'm also looking at this. Let's share information and build a bigger picture. Because if you're just point and shoot and looking at everything from just the isolated lens of your own network, unfortunately, it's an impossible ask, right, to be able to have comprehensive threat intelligence. I will say comprehensive is an impossible term in and of itself. That's just saying, like, I know everything that's going on secure at all times. It does not happen.
Right.
But the more we are kind of sharing this information and building upon each other's research and insights, the better. As far as, Lindsay, to your point of what does AI mean to it, my strongest point at this current iteration of what AI is doing, right, for a regular user, is that it's a force multiplier. If you have a great program and you have a human who can wield this power for good and can tune the findings and can provide the right data sets to train the models, you might be able to 10x your output. If you are looking at AI as, oh, we're just going to plug in this external tool that will magically do everything for me and give me all the answers,
Right.
and you aren't able to understand when there's hallucinations or misinformation, and you aren't able to critically think about and iterate that over time, unfortunately, that force multiplier will work in the negative and provide you useless information, which sometimes we do see online today. And you won't even be able to necessarily catch that or understand the negative impact of that to your operations until much later.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard that, people say that AI will only make good people better.
Exactly.
Better, faster, more efficient. But unfortunately, from what I understand, the bad guys are also using it. So how are you seeing the adversaries employing it these days?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even down to the detail of removing, right, changing the tone of a phishing email so that it actually sounds like it's coming from, let's say, PayPal's marketing team or PayPal's finance team, whereas you see a lot of materials that are riddled in errors and grammar issues, and it's clearly maybe not English native or things are slightly off. Being able to have, right, somebody, AI, ChatGPT, let's say, come in and say, rewrite it as if it were this, rewrite it with this tone. Sure, they have some guardrails in place, but anything a threat actor would be able to manipulate the models and the output for it the same way would be used in a legitimate use case too. So it is very difficult to deal with that. I think the other piece too is AI so far in practice is great for ideation, is great for adaptation, is great for restructuring and changing and giving first stabs, right? And that helps with a lot of the time, both in the first 10% of any project as well as the last 10%. So I do think that, unfortunately, what is helpful and great and a force multiplier for good on, let's say, the defender side is 100% as effective on the threat actor side as well.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I've seen that happening over and over again. And when we think about those gaps in the industry, I've thought about CISA being folded up or shrinking to a small organization. We think about the information sharing that's out there. What's that going to mean in the near future? What do you think? What are the gaps in the industry currently that you see or that can be filled in the near future?
My overall take on this industry too is that for a lot of good, but also some issues, is that because it's been so vendor driven, right? For profit commercial interest driving what tools exist, what threat actors are called, how to properly, right, set up tooling within any organization, that causes kind of a catch up game, right, with public entities, governments, everyone else, citizenry even, of what does it mean? How do we need to share? How do we need to report? Where is the centralized body of information, reporting, and metrics? Because otherwise it's commonly hidden right behind paywalls or for-profit intent. And so I do think that even things like the shared like technical language of like Styx taxi to be able to transmit technical information related to threat objects, right, and indicators, that's something that is just now in the last couple of years taking off, where 5 years ago there were a lot of issues. We had an op-ed about it. And so the structure and the alignment and the vision behind how security needs to happen has been taken in the reins by for-profit companies. And I think a lot has happened, right? I'm a vendor as well. So there's no hate whatsoever. But as a result, even CISA spends a lot of time saying, okay, now how do we bring all of that effort, right, within a government-led, purpose-driven output?
Yeah, I've got to imagine that's a challenge for you because I know that a lot of customers will be asking, and I've asked it myself when it comes to the threat intelligence companies, how's the quality? How good is it? And I imagine that's a hurdle that you often have to deal with to, convey that, yes, we really are bringing you value. Here's where it is.
Right. And as a business owner too, in the threat intel space, it's a question we always try to hold ourselves very honest to. And the challenge is that with threat intel companies, everyone has a slightly different process. They track different indicators. They structure things differently. They will score, right? Confidence scoring of is something good or bad differently. Then their export options are different, and how they're associating, right, indicators to threats to TTPs are different. And so part of the problem is when somebody comes is like, part of how we help them is, this is how we do it. Here are ways that other companies may approach it differently, for better or for worse in your situation. And then also, if you're willing, and I've done this before, say, put our feed to the test. We will donate a feed for you for 2 months. Can you benchmark us? Can you tell us what your observations have been? Tell us if you're seeing false positives, false negatives, or true positives and true negatives. And one of the challenges is you think, oh, that's great, so obvious, you'll be able to get so much data. A lot of times the feedback is still pretty anecdotal, and metrics are kind of on a smaller scale where it is very difficult to put apples to apples on this feed versus that feed, even in a specific client situation. There was research done by an academic, and I'll have to find it and I'll share the link with you, about the state of commercial and open source feeds and how much overlap, and importantly, how little overlap there is as well. And I think there was, let's call it 9% of IOCs were overlapped, but that's because it was all being ingested from the same open source feeds like abuse.ch online already that is known to be high fidelity. And then naturally you understand that commercial feeds, when they have their own sensor networks, when they have their own environments, of course their IOCs will be different as well. So it is extremely confusing and extremely challenging for, let's say, a client, a customer that says, I just want good feeds, good indicators relevant to me. And then I turn the question back saying, well, how do you know, like, what is relevant to you? What are your priorities? What are your threats? Tell me more about your internal situation, because that context will be what sets the assessment on what is a good feed for you.
I think it's very important that you take that approach. And you kind of got into my personal favorite subject on threat intelligence. And I'm going off the script for this, but this is my favorite thing. Very often do you have your customers coming to you and saying, I know you have these feeds. I know you have the open source. I know we have all this stuff. I know I can tell you about my threats, and I know you have insight into my industry, maybe some benchmarking and stuff. But how do you deal with it when a customer goes and says, look, I don't need to know that everyone in the neighborhood is getting broken into. I want to know when I'm getting broken into. how much can you customize it and how much really targeted intel can you give to an individual customer? And I know it's tough.
Right. The joke in the Intel industry is always like the answer is it depends because it always will depend. And it's funny because, Joe, you hit on this point of sure, there are there are teams that really know their stuff. They've done their research. They have it. They know exactly what to test for. And most of the time, and it's by no fault, everyone's stretched thin, they don't have that. And so I have scenarios sometimes where a client comes to me saying, we were told we need threat intelligence. And I go, uh-oh, red flag. Who told you? Your board members? Some CEO who doesn't know like anything about security?
Some dude at a conference said you gotta have
exactly.
this.
Someone at RSA screamed threat intelligence, and now your company needs to have a threat intel program. Exactly. And so I actually wrote a blog about the like tips for tips. So TIP stands for Threat Intelligence Platform. Tips, procurement tips for tips. And so in that, there's a couple pieces of advice that I share with everyone. And honestly, it's relevant to any security tool you might be looking into. But one is how important it is to have requirements written out. So these are testable metrics saying it has to be in as detailed as it has to be able to, we need to be able to buy this feed in CSV format because that's what will give us value on day one. Two, it needs to be able to give us industry insights on, let's say, healthcare threats, and it has to be structured by, these campaigns because that's how we're tracking it. What are those 5, 10, 100, 700 requirements and how important are those? There's a framework called Moscow of must have, could have, should have, won't have to help you define that because a lot of our teams, they go in, they're being like, I'm just going to look at a bunch of platforms. I'm just going to look at a bunch of feeds and see what makes sense. And that is an impossible ask because everything is not in parallel and there's no, no matter who promises, there's no database that actually gives you a one-to-one comparison because that is inherently impossible in this space. And so having that, and then also being able to truly assign a point person, a technical contact who is given the time and energy to figure out how to make a POC work, and then beyond the POC, how to make the implementation work, and then beyond the implementation, how to actually manage and curate, right, your data and intelligence over time to track it, not just let it run off into whatever world it's going to go into, and then have access to like engineers and analysts that are able to build those connections, make sure it's working, and then like work and take value out of these findings. And then last piece, not as relevant to the conversation you're having, Joe, is being able to control the conversation on pricing, not just at the point of buying, but scaling and changing and future pricing as well. Look, there's stuff that's out of your control, but there's also a lot of stuff that consumers, right, purchasers can do early and often. So kind of what you're saying reminded me of this blog post because people have come to me being like, we're looking for threat intel. Are you a good tool? And I'm like, I'd love to say yes, but let's dig into this further. And there have been times where I'm like, hey, look, if you have a budget and you need to fulfill this mandate, but I'm hearing from you that, you don't necessarily know, let me help you. Of course, we're willing to be the product for you. But in a year, no matter who you buy, you need to be answering some of these questions in order to get value, or else someone up the chain, down the chain is going to be like, why are we spending 6 figures of, like revenue without knowing what 6 figures of expenses without knowing what our output is looking like?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, a threat intel outfit is essentially a service provider. And I always say, as the customer, you get out of it what you put into it. If you don't talk to them, if you don't engage, tell them what you want, you're not going to.
Yeah, if you don't have visibility too. But Grace, I mean, since the industry is evolving into different spheres, right? You have education, you have finance, you have driverless cars, right? API testing. Do you have to evolve with the needs of the cybersecurity industry in terms of, are you going to go into satellite tracking or tracing crypto around, tracing missing crypto, and like does threat intelligence reach that far?
So threat intelligence is an overall field. Absolutely. We need niche, specialized experts who are great at researching, getting in the trenches. And there are a lot of different providers who pop up all the time that do crypto-specific intelligence or dark web monitoring, reputation monitoring, impersonation. For us personally as a company, we have been tempted, right, to chase new avenues, new data types, and there will be, and there should be providers that do that. But we also learned early and often what our value is, and us chasing and following the next thing didn't necessarily make sense from a business standpoint and also from our own core value standpoint. And so it doesn't mean that we don't think that there's space for different types of, like, I don't know, AI intelligence. But for us, we know that the solutions and the problems are not solved even in the pure play domain IP URL space of getting enriched data, of properly risk scoring, of pulling back the right information a security analyst needs to either support automated processing or human processing. And so we doubled down on that. We're working on our risk scoring all the time. We're working on our scanning infrastructure, reaching out to these hosts all the time to show you data, to help you pivot around those data points as well. And so, for our short-term foreseeable future, we're doubling down on the things we already know users come to us for, refining that, making sure it's very valuable, getting additional feedback, adding the right integrations, making sure we play well with the tools that our users are using already.
That's great. Joe?
Well, security moves fast. I used to say it was the fastest moving part of IT until AI came along and took the crown.
I would say it's funny because the surface level of security moves so fast, where there's a new 3 or 4 letter tool every year, there's a new magic quadrant, there's new threat actors and campaigns and tools, but the fundamentals really haven't changed. And I would say we're so far from doing the fundamentals very well. How many times are we still screaming, right? Kicking and screaming, saying enable 2FA on all of your company devices. So I think that there's this very funny dichotomy of, yeah, there's a lot changing, and at the same time, there's so much still to do right and do well from the get-go that we already know about.
Oh, yes, a lot of things boil down to the fundamentals. I keep hearing that over and over again. All right, well, thank you for joining us for this episode. The podcast is now available on most major platforms, including YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. And you can follow us on social media also. It would be really helpful. We'd appreciate it so much if you'd subscribe and if you'd share and tell your friends. Rate it, review it, send us comments. We already have a nice audience with our chapter, but we really want to be helping the whole community and get this out to the broadest audience we can. We've got lots more coming here from Unencrypted Chatter, the podcast from ISC2 New Jersey. Grace, thank you so much for joining us.
Grace.
This has been a lot of fun. And it's very nice of you to spend time with us. Thanks to my co-host, Lindsay. It's been fun hosting with you. And especially thanks to all our listeners for joining us. And please come back and see us again. Thanks.